Allison Ramirez here, Christian author, editor, and content creator, here with a brand new video, which is inspired by my video from last week, which was introducing you to my brand new podcast, The Work of Thy Hands. The premiere episode is already out. You can feel free to listen to it on Spotify or similar podcast platforms. And when I was making this video, I realized that there's a lot of really great podcasts that are already out there. Podcasts specifically that can be helpful to you as a Christian author and writer. We live in a really busy world, and the great thing about podcasts is that you can listen to them when you're on the go. If you're cooking, cleaning, driving, podcast is a great way to engage in new content and learn information while still doing other tasks and things that you have going on, because all you need is your ears to listen to them. So I'm on Spotify right now. You might be listening on Apple or other streaming platforms of podcasts, but regardless of the platform you're on, you should be able to access all of these and more. I wanted to just go through some of the podcasts that I have found helpful to me as a Christian author. First of all, there is a group which I have mentioned before, which is called Legend Fiction, and they have a podcast that Dominic puts out, and it's called Legend Makers. And on this podcast, there is interviews with a lot of writers, authors. I think there's a few people on here that are not writers and authors, other creatives, but there's a lot of really great conversations taking place. I was actually interviewed on this podcast back when it was called the Catholic Authors Show. So you can actually maybe find my interview here. It's like a few years ago. Here it is. Writing dystopian Christian fiction with an invisible hero. So I was interviewed a couple years back. Basically, the podcast began as a Catholic Authors Show, and then it was rebranded as Legend Makers. So there's currently two different podcasts, but the one is kind of a continuation of the one that came before. So these are really great podcasts. They have a lot of really good tips and tricks for you as a writer working on your own book. Specifically, I think most of these interviews are having to do with fiction books. So if you write nonfiction, it might not be quite as helpful, but still, this is a podcast that's directly related to Christian authors and writers. Of course, my brand new podcast, The Work of Thy Hands, is all about interviews with Christian creatives. So that can be writers, editors, also people that are in any sort of creative field. I haven't had anyone sign up yet who is not a writer, but I would love to be able to interview someone that's an artist or a musician or a photographer or performer, for example. So, well, again, we're going to talk about the nature of being co-creative. So this is my brand new podcast. I have a couple other friends who are writers who have their own podcasts. This one is by a fellow writer friend of mine, Thomas Salerno. His podcast is called Perilous Realms. He's actually going to be one of the interviewed guests up and coming on my podcast. I haven't had a chance to listen to much of his content, but I know that he focuses on, yes, the crossroads of faith and fantastic fiction. So another like Christian bookish related, writing related podcast. Another one that I have also not had a chance to listen to yet, but is another author friend of mine, is Sail Bold, a podcast by Jacqueline Luca. I know she's had this podcast going on now for a couple of years, and she is also a Christian writer and creative. And then, of course, I also have other podcasts here that are faith and nature podcasts, but they're not necessarily for writers. So the ones I showed you are ones that specifically talk about like Christian creatives, writers, authors, that sort of thing. So I hope this is helpful, and I would just recommend, to really lean into podcasts, especially if you are wanting to learn and grow as a Christian writer. Also, too, podcasts are really great places where you can go in order to be interviewed, to be an interviewed guest. So if you have a book out and you want to further promote it, knowing about some of these podcasts is super helpful, because by being an interviewed guest, you have an opportunity to reach more potential viewers and more readers for your books. So this can also be a really good marketing and community building approach too as well. So I hope this video was helpful, and best of luck with you in your writing. You'll be in my prayers.